The atmosphere was electric at the gala as Maximilian Carter, CEO of Carter Holdings, stood before the crowd. His business empire was thriving, the stock prices soaring, and the future seemed limitless. The crowd roared with applause as Maximilian smiled, nodding to the camera. His loyal business partner Sophia Turner stood beside him, looking pleased but reserved. The two exchanged a quick glance before Maximilian spoke. "This is just the beginning." Yet, despite the praise, a knot formed in Maximilian's stomach. He could sense a storm brewing, something he couldn't quite place but knew was coming. The market had always been volatile, and he had made his fair share of risky decisions. But today, in the face of success, he wondered if he had pushed the limits too far. Maximilian leaned back in his chair, the weight of the last few weeks pressing on his shoulders. The company was riding high, but there was a storm on the horizon. His mentor, Elliot Westbrook, had always warned him about the dangers of complacency. He trusted Elliot, but today, even his calm wisdom couldn't quiet the doubt gnawing at him. "You're not invincible, Maximilian," Elliot had said, his voice gravelly from years of experience. Maximilian couldn't shake the feeling that the fragile balance he'd worked so hard to build was beginning to crack. The question that lingered in his mind now was, how long could he keep up this facade of control before everything fell apart? Maximilian sat across from his trusted business partner, Sophia Turner, at the sleek glass conference table. She was reviewing some quarterly reports, but Maximilian could sense her thoughts weren't entirely on the numbers. "Do you think we're ready for the next step?" Maximilian asked, his voice steady, though uncertainty lingered in the air. Sophia didn't immediately respond, her eyes scanning the documents in front of her. Finally she looked up, her expression guarded but thoughtful. "We've been pushing the envelope for a while, Max. You know the risks," she replied, her voice calm but carrying an underlying tension. "But I'm not sure we have a solid backup plan if things go south." The silence between them grew thick. It was clear, the weight of their decisions had begun to take a toll. The future that once felt limitless now seemed precarious, and Maximilian felt the pressure mounting from all sides. Sophia's gaze lingered on him, her concern now evident. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the otherwise silent room. As the meeting concluded, Maximilian couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Despite his usual confidence, he could sense an undercurrent of doubt. He watched Sophia leave the conference room, her steps purposeful yet slower than usual. He remained seated for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from him. He thought about the risks they had taken, the deals they had made, and the constant pressure to perform. There was always a price for success, but lately, it seemed that the cost was escalating. Maximilian looked down at the financial projections in front of him, wondering if the numbers could be trusted. Then a voice broke his reverie. It was Elliot Westbrook calling him. "Maximilian," Elliot's gravelly voice crackled through the phone. "Remember, the higher you climb, the harder the fall." The old man's warning echoed in Maximilian's mind as he hung up, the weight of it sinking in deeper. Maybe this time the price might be too high. Later that evening, Maximilian found himself in his private office, staring out at the sprawling city below. The lights from the skyscrapers twinkled like stars, but the view no longer brought him peace. He could feel the weight of all his decisions pressing down on him. His phone buzzed with another notification, a reminder of a meeting with Peter Blackwell, the investor who had been pushing him to expand even faster. Maximilian had always respected Peter's financial acumen, but now he wondered if Peter's ambition was driving them both to the edge of something far more dangerous. He didn't even hear the knock on his office door. It was James Palmer, his trusted ally and business partner. "Max, we need to talk," James said quietly, stepping inside. Maximilian turned to face him, his shoulders tense. "About what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed Maximilian a folder. "This," James began, "could be a turning point, or the beginning of the end." Maximilian's gaze dropped to the folder, his heart racing. Whatever it was, he knew it was bad. Maximilian stared at his phone, the screen glowing with an anonymous message. "The truth is out. You're being watched." His heart raced. He had always operated in the open, but this felt different. Someone within his own circle was betraying him. Panic clawed at him, but he quickly dismissed it. "It's just a scare tactic," he muttered to himself. But deep down, Maximilian knew something had shifted. The pressure of leading such an empire had always been immense. But now, it felt suffocating. Was this the beginning of the end? Later that day, Maximilian met with his investor, Peter Blackwell. The stakes were higher now. Peter's tone was colder than usual. "You've got some problems, Maximilian. The market's turning and you're getting too comfortable. You need to make a move, or everything will crumble," Peter warned. Maximilian clenched his jaw. Peter wasn't wrong, but he didn't want to admit it. The deals were too risky, and the longer he delayed, the worse it would get. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Peter was pushing him toward a dangerous game. After the meeting, Maximilian returned to his office, feeling the weight of Peter's words. He couldn't ignore the growing unease within his team, and Sophia's recent distant behavior only added to his anxiety. She had always been his rock, but now she seemed distracted, preoccupied with something that wasn't being shared. He needed answers. "Sophia, we need to talk," he said, his voice firm but filled with a hint of desperation. But when he looked into her eyes, he knew something had changed. She was no longer the woman he trusted with everything. The conversation between Maximilian and Sophia was strained. She confessed she'd overheard discussions within the company, whispers of financial discrepancies and growing doubt. "There are leaks, Max. People are talking about what's happening inside Carter Holdings. And it's not good," she said. Maximilian's heart sank. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it from Sophia made it real. His empire, his carefully curated success, was now at risk. The realization hit him hard, the cracks were deepening, and he was running out of time. Maximilian spent the evening combing through the reports, trying to find anything that might explain the sudden shift in the company's trajectory. The numbers weren't adding up, and every analysis he did led to the same conclusion. Something was very wrong. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown source. "You're too late." His blood ran cold. He knew the message wasn't a coincidence. There was someone or something working against him, and he was out of time. He needed to act fast or it would be too late. The days following the meeting with Sophia weighed heavily on Maximilian. The stock market was volatile, and the leaks within his company were becoming harder to ignore. The reports from his financial team confirmed his worst fear. The company's value was plummeting. Maximilian tried to maintain his composure, but each passing hour felt like a step closer to disaster. "We can't keep this up, Max," James warned, standing in the doorway of his office. "The company's reputation is at stake." Maximilian knew he had to act, but the decisions before him were more difficult than he had ever faced. His vision of success was now shadowed by the possibility of collapse, and he found himself questioning every move. The following days were filled with frantic calls, meetings, and attempts to salvage the business. Maximilian worked relentlessly, reaching out to investors, hoping for some form of reassurance, but nothing seemed to stick. It wasn't until Peter Blackwell, his investor, called with an ultimatum. "You're on borrowed time, Maximilian. Either you take control or I'll step in and take over," Peter threatened. Maximilian felt the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for his company now, he was fighting for his future. But with every move, it felt like he was sinking deeper into a financial abyss. The stress of trying to keep his business afloat was taking its toll on Maximilian. That evening, he found himself walking the city streets, trying to clear his mind. Sophia had been distant for days, and he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. As he walked through the quiet streets, he replayed their last conversation in his mind. Was she hiding something from him? Had she become just another piece in the game he was losing? He thought about the choices that had brought him here, wondering if there was any way to reverse the damage. Maximilian returned to his office early the next morning, and the weight of the previous night's thoughts still clung to him. He had no more time to waste. The company's downfall seemed inevitable. He gathered his team for an emergency meeting, and as he looked around the room, the familiar faces were now strangers to him. They had always been loyal, but their eyes showed doubt. Sophia entered last, her eyes meeting his, but there was no warmth. "We need a solution now," Maximilian said, his voice cold. "I've given everything to this company, and I won't let it fall apart." But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. His resolve was fading. After the meeting, Maximilian sat alone in his office, feeling the full weight of his choices. He had ignored the warning signs, trusted the wrong people, and now the consequences were catching up with him. Sophia's betrayal, though subtle, was clear now. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the whispers that had grown louder over the last few weeks. His phone buzzed again, another message. "It's too late now." Maximilian leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling the abyss closing in on him. It wasn't just his company on the line anymore, it was his legacy, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. Maximilian sat across from his mentor, Elliot Westbrook, the man whose wisdom had once guided him to the heights of success. But now, as Elliot spoke, Maximilian could hear the bitterness in his voice. "You've let it all slip away, Max," Elliot said bluntly. "The market is unforgiving, and you've been playing with fire for too long. Now it's burning you alive." Maximilian clenched his fists, his frustration evident. "I don't need your warnings anymore, Elliot," he snapped. "I know what I'm doing." But deep down, Maximilian felt a pang of doubt. Maybe Elliot was right. Perhaps his ambition had blinded him to the dangers all along. It wasn't the first time he'd dismissed advice, but now he couldn't help but wonder, had he truly made the right choices? Maximilian's mind raced as he left Elia's office. The world outside seemed to be closing in on him. His thoughts were interrupted when Peter Blackwell sent a text message. "Time's up. Either you agree to the terms, or I'm out." The words were blunt, but they carried a deadly weight. Maximilian's mind flashed back to his earlier conversation with Peter. He had always known that Peter's offer was risky, but this ultimatum left him with no room to maneuver. He couldn't afford to lose Peter's backing, but agreeing to the terms meant sacrificing everything he had built. He had to make a decision. But which path would lead to salvation, and which would be his undoing? Maximilian arrived home late that night, his mind too consumed by the day's events to rest. As he entered his penthouse, he found Sophia Turner sitting on the couch, her face pale in the dim light. The tension between them had been building for days, and now it was unbearable. "I know what you're doing, Max," Sophia said softly, not meeting his eyes. "You're thinking of agreeing to Peter's terms, aren't you?" Maximilian hesitated. "I don't have a choice, Sophia," he replied. "If I don't do this, we lose everything." She finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with disappointment. "You don't have to sacrifice everything for success. You're losing yourself in the process." The words hit Maximilian harder than any market crash. Was he really losing himself in the race for control? The next day, Maximilian stood in the boardroom, facing a room full of executives, each one waiting for him to make the call. The tension was palpable. Peter's offer was still on the table, but the consequences of accepting it were too high. His phone buzzed again with another message from Peter. "You're running out of time." Maximilian stood still, the weight of the moment sinking in. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, each person waiting for him to make the decision that would define the company's future. His fingers hovered over his phone, but before he could act, James Palmer entered the room. "Max, don't do it. There's another way," James said, his voice urgent. "If you take this deal, you're gambling everything." Maximilian looked at James, torn. Stakes had never been higher. Maximilian sat alone in his office, staring at the deal in front of him. Peter's terms were final, and he had no more time to negotiate. His phone buzzed once again. Another message. "This is your last chance." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his choices settle over him. He had built an empire on risks, but now the price of those risks was threatening to destroy everything he had worked for. Was there another way? Or had he gone too far? He reached for his phone and tapped out a response. "I'll take the deal." As he hit send, he felt a sense of finality. It was done. He had chosen survival over integrity. Maximilian had just finalized the deal with Peter Blackwell, but his relief was short-lived. The next day, a shocking revelation hit him like a freight train. Sophia had betrayed him. She was the one who had leaked information to Peter, orchestrating the very deal he had reluctantly signed. As he confronted her, her face showed no remorse. "You've become too reckless, Max," she said, her voice cold. "I did what needed to be done to save what was left of this company." Maximilian's heart sank as he realized that Sophia, the one person he trusted the most, had been working against him all along. His world was crumbling, and the weight of her betrayal was the heaviest blow of all. Maximilian was left alone in his office after the confrontation with Sophia. The betrayal stung deeply, but there was no time to dwell on it. The damage had already been done. The company's collapse was imminent, and now Maximilian's every move would be under scrutiny. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't from Peter. It was a message from an anonymous source. "Everything you've built is a house of cards. One more push, and it all falls." Maximilian stared at the message, his mind racing. Was there a way to pull back from the edge, or was he too far gone? Maximilian knew he couldn't sit back and wait for the inevitable. He needed to take control, even if it meant making deals he had sworn never to make. In the middle of the night, he arranged a clandestine meeting with Peter Blackwell. "We're at the crossroads, Max. Either you go all in, or I take the reins," Peter said, his voice dripping with cold confidence. Maximilian clenched his jaw. "You'll never have full control," he shot back. "I won't let you ruin everything." But even as he said the words, he knew he was losing. The stakes were too high, and Peter's influence was suffocating. Next morning, Maximilian couldn't escape the crushing weight of his choices. His team had begun to question him, whispers of doubt growing louder in the office. The news had already leaked to the media, and now the whole world knew about his downfall. Reports of financial mismanagement and internal conflicts were everywhere. The facade he had so carefully built was crumbling before his eyes. As he walked through the office, he caught the gaze of one of his most trusted employees, Maya Lopez, the whistleblower who had first uncovered the cracks in the company. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She had been right all along. The betrayal, the lies, and the greed had finally caught up with him. Maximilian sat in his office, staring out at the city below. The weight of everything, his company, his relationships, his legacy, felt unbearable. He thought of Sophia, and the betrayal still stung, but now there was a deeper ache inside him. He had done everything to protect the empire, but it had all slipped away. The phone buzzed again, and Maximilian knew it was from Peter Blackwell. He hesitated, knowing that once he responded, there would be no going back. As his finger hovered over the screen, he realized the truth. There was no redemption. He had become the very thing he had once despised. A man who had lost everything for power. Maximilian's life had spiraled out of control, and now, standing in front of his shattered company, he realized just how far he had fallen. His empire was in ruins. His phone buzzed, another message from Peter Blackwell. "I told you it would end this way, Max. It's over." Maximilian clenched his jaw. Peter had won, but it wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about everything he had lost: trust, friends, and his integrity. The weight of his decisions came crashing down on him. He had been so consumed by power and success that he didn't see the danger until it was too late. Now, facing the consequences, he wondered if he could ever rebuild, or if the pieces were too scattered. The news of the company's bankruptcy hit the media like wildfire. Headlines blared across every financial news outlet, and Maximilian found himself at the center of the storm. It wasn't just a business failure, it was a public spectacle. The whispers in the streets, the looks from old colleagues, and the judgment from investors were all too much to bear. The pressure was unbearable. Maximilian walked into the conference room, where his remaining team members had gathered. They looked at him with a mix of disappointment and fear. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it did." And now, I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces. As Maximilian sat alone in his office, the weight of everything he had lost was suffocating. Sophia Turner had left, and the betrayal cut deeper with every passing hour. He thought about their conversations, the dreams they had shared, and the future they once imagined together. It was all gone now. Sophia had been his anchor, but in the end she had slipped away, leaving him to drown in the consequences of his own choices. Maximilian poured himself a drink and stared into the glass. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from James Palmer. "I'm sorry, Max. I tried to warn you." The words felt like a final blow. He had lost everyone who had mattered. The silence in the office was deafening. Maximilian knew he couldn't undo the past, but that didn't stop him from trying. He spent hours reviewing every piece of data, every financial report, hoping to find a way to salvage something from the wreckage. But the truth was undeniable. The market had shifted, and he had gambled everything on fleeting success. Peter Blackwell had been right all along. The harsh reality was sinking in. The empire Maximilian had built was crumbling, and now he was left with the painful task of facing the people he had let down. "You failed them, Max," he muttered to himself. But even as the words echoed in his mind, he knew the real failure wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the loss of his soul. The day came when Maximilian had no choice but to face the music. He stood before the media, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. His once great company was now a symbol of failure. "I take full responsibility for the collapse," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "But know this, I will rebuild, even if it means starting from the ground up." As the cameras captured every moment, Maximilian realized that redemption would never come easily. His fall from grace had been swift, but the climb back would be far more arduous. The battle for his future had only just begun. Maximilian sat in the dim light of his apartment, a glass of whiskey in hand, his mind heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. The company was gone, and his name was now synonymous with failure. But in the stillness of the moment, a strange clarity began to form. He could rebuild. He had no empire left to protect, no legacy to defend, but he had one thing: his drive. He had lost his way, but now, with nothing left to lose, he could choose a different path. The years of blind ambition had led him here, but perhaps this was the beginning of something new. He set the glass down and picked up his phone, typing a message to James Palmer. "Let's start over. We'll do it right this time." The next morning, James Palmer arrived at Maximilian's apartment, a sense of quiet resolve in both their eyes. "You sure about this?" James asked as he sat across from Maximilian. Maximilian nodded, his expression calm. "We'll rebuild," he said, his voice steady. "But this time, we'll do it with integrity." The weight of the decision felt different now, not because of the money or the power, but because it was no longer about winning at any cost. It was about doing what was right. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Maximilian knew one thing for certain. This time, he would fight for something more meaningful than just success. Maximilian stood at the window of his apartment, watching the city below. It was early morning, and the streets were still quiet. He had been thinking about everything he had lost, and everything he could still salvage. Elliot Westbrook had once told him that success wasn't just about money or power. It was about knowing when to walk away. Maximilian had learned that the hard way. He no longer sought to conquer the world. Instead, he wanted to create something that would last, something that would make a difference. It wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for it. As he turned away from the window, his phone buzzed again, a new message from Sophia Turner. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Max." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Maybe there was still hope for redemption. As Maximilian began to take the first steps toward rebuilding his life, he realized that the road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. The world had changed, and so had he. He had learned the hard way that power and success were fleeting, but integrity was something that could endure. It wasn't about fighting to regain what he had lost, but about creating something new. As he walked through the streets, feeling the crisp air on his face, he knew that he had to leave his old self behind. This wasn't just about business. It was about redemption. He wouldn't let the past define him. It was time to forge a new path. Maximilian stood at the edge of the city, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. It had been a long and difficult journey, but he had made it through. He had rebuilt not just his business, but himself. He had learned that success wasn't defined by money or power, but by the people you trusted and the choices you made. He had lost everything once, but now, with the future ahead of him, he was ready to rebuild with a new sense of purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning.